Ballot measures in 3 Western states ask voters if they want to legalize marijuana.
Possession is now legal in Washington state.
Recreational pot, anything less than an ounce, no longer illegal in Washington state.
As of midnight, Washington state's new law makes it legal for adults to possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
According to a recent survey, less than half of people ages 12 to 17 think that pot is harmful. Such views have been influenced by a growing trend to legalize the use of marijuana.
Weed is okay.
Yeah, marijuana's safe.
Cigarettes are much more addictive.
But how safe is marijuana? This program will look at what the latest research shows. A number of states have legalized marijuana for medical purposes, and a few of these have made it legal for recreational purposes as well. These developments have been celebrated by people who support legalization.
Marijuana fans are celebrating in Denver, with voters in Colorado and Washington state the first ever to make it legal for adults to possess and sell small amounts of pot for recreational use.
Others, however, worry about possible consequences, particularly the risks to young users. But before looking at the controversies surrounding legalization, it's important to clarify what legal means. In states that have legalized pot for recreational purposes, you have to be over 21 to use it. Just as with alcohol, marijuana is still illegal for anyone under 21. States that have legalized marijuana for medical purposes all require a doctor's prescription, and for minors, a parent's permission may be needed as well. It's still illegal to sell marijuana without a special license. All states have strict laws against driving under the influence of any drug, including marijuana. It's illegal to go on your school campus with marijuana. Students who bring pot to school risk getting suspended or expelled. To make things really confusing, even though several state legislatures have legalized marijuana, the federal government has not. In other words, it is still illegal to use marijuana for any purpose at the national level. This means that, theoretically, you could still be arrested by federal officials even in states that have legalized it. But the fact remains that marijuana is easy to get, even for teenagers.
Teenagers are still going to smoke. They're still going to get a hold of it. They're still going to break laws and do things that are not good for anybody.
It's like, who doesn't know how to get weed in Colorado? It's Colorado.
Leslie Walker is a physician who treats teenagers, many of whom have problems related to marijuana use. She worries that the legalization of marijuana has led to confusion among her patients.
I think what's happened with the legalization of marijuana in Colorado and Washington, it's a further decrease in perception of risk for teens. And what I mean by that is the more that they see the general population say it's safe to use marijuana, that it's legal, the more teens will think that it's really okay and there's not harmful.
So what are the risks? Let's look first at the possible health consequences. Drive around the streets of Denver, Colorado, and you'll see more medical marijuana dispensaries than Starbucks. In Colorado and a number of other states, it is now legal to use medically prescribed marijuana to treat pain, muscle tension, and loss of appetite, and to control nausea, particularly for cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy. However, the federal government's Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, has not approved marijuana.
The Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, sees it as a Class 1 scheduled drug, which means that it's highly addictive and that there's no proven benefit for it in the medical realm.
We'll get into the question of the addictive qualities of marijuana later in this program, but for now, let's look at some other reasons why the FDA has not approved medical marijuana. One major reason is that there have not been enough clinical trials showing that marijuana's benefits outweigh its health risks.
To get FDA approval, you need to have large, well-controlled studies, and the studies of marijuana to date are small studies. The largest number of patients in these studies is about 50, and typically to get FDA approval, you study hundreds if not thousands of patients in these clinical trials.
Many researchers feel that there are chemical components in marijuana that are worth developing into medications. However, to get FDA approval, these ingredients have to be isolated from other potentially harmful chemicals in pot. Also, the ingredients of a medicine have to be in a form such as a pill that controls the amounts and makes them consistent from one dose to the next. This allows doctors to determine the proper dose and frequency for each patient. But the quantities of THC and other chemicals in marijuana vary greatly from one plant to another. It's impossible to make sure that the potentially beneficial ingredients are administered in the right amount and right frequency.
You can't just say, here's a bag of marijuana and use it 1 to 100 times a day as needed, and the marijuana is not properly controlled in terms of how much THC is in it, how much of other compounds are in it. You can't tell people, here, go smoke this.
But one argument that you often hear is that because marijuana is a plant, it's safe.
I believe that marijuana is a lot safer than any other drug because it's organic and it comes from the ground itself and people grow it just like a plant. And that's all it is a plant.
When considering this argument, it's useful to compare marijuana to another natural product that's legal in all 50 states, tobacco. Almost everybody now agrees that tobacco is not safe.
If you look at the ingredients of marijuana smoke, the ingredients of tobacco smoke, they're highly similar. And so we can't recommend that people smoke something.
Marijuana, in fact, contains many of the same cancer-causing chemicals that are found in tobacco. However, we don't yet know for sure that pot causes lung cancer. More research is needed, but there are some health effects of marijuana of which we are sure. We know that shortly after smoking pot, heart rate increases by 20 to 100%, and this effect can last up to 3 hours. In one study, it was estimated that marijuana users have almost 5 times the risk of a heart attack in the first hour after smoking the drug. Marijuana smoke irritates lung tissue, and frequent marijuana smokers can have many of the same respiratory problems experienced by tobacco smokers, including a heightened risk of lung infections. Yet because marijuana has been legalized for specific medical purposes, these and other risks are often ignored.
I have adolescent patients come into treatment saying, hey doc, why would I stop using marijuana? It's my medicine for my anger, anxiety, ADHD. And so there's this perception that if something's medicine, that it must be good for you. And if it's good for me, then I should use it and I should use more of it. And the danger is even increased when you have a very commercialized system. So you have a system of medical marijuana centers, for example, that are trying to make a profit and then are allowed to advertise. You see healthy people in these advertisements, and the connotation is if I use marijuana, maybe I can be beautiful, healthy, and strong like the person in that advertisement.
Because marijuana affects balance and coordination, safety is another health risk.
We're driving down the street. He looked like he was overly relaxed. Before I know it, he's heading into somebody oncoming. You know, I'm thinking like, oh my God, we're gonna die. Like, are you gonna move? So, yeah, it was not a good experience, and I have not touched pot since.
Marijuana use more than doubles a driver's risk of being in an accident. The risk is even greater if marijuana is used along with alcohol. It's not just driving that's a safety issue.
You're going to have a much harder time with your motor control, with your reaction time. I've seen kids with skateboard accidents. You know, whatever it is that you're doing, you're not going to be able to do as well as if you were sober. So, you know, we see lots of different kinds of accidents with kids with slowed reaction time.
Marijuana impairs balance and motor coordination by causing chemical changes in the brain. Such changes increase risks to mental health as well. A recent study found that marijuana use may be linked to psychosis in teens.
That's hearing things that aren't there, seeing things that aren't there, having delusions, which are fixed false beliefs that the community as a whole doesn't share.
After I'd get high enough, I'd hear stuff that wasn't even, like, nobody else heard, or I'd see stuff and nobody else would see it, and I was the only one seeing it.
Does psychosis result from marijuana use? Or are people who suffer from psychosis more likely to turn to marijuana? The research suggests that both things may be happening. But for clinicians like Christian Thurstone and Leslie Walker, The risks from using marijuana are clear, and many users themselves would agree.
I regularly see kids coming in because they've tried marijuana and they are having trouble with hallucinations, they're having trouble with paranoia, they're having trouble feeling like they're going to die because it distorts your thoughts. And for some people it can be a pleasurable distortion, for others it can be quite damaging and quite disturbing.
Studies also indicate a link between marijuana and paranoia.
I think almost everyone I know that's ever smoked has been paranoid from time to time.
I always think something bad is gonna happen. I always think someone's out to get me. I always think, I always think negative when I'm high.
There may also be links between marijuana and schizophrenia and depression, but whether marijuana causes these conditions isn't clear. What is clear is that there are risks to mental health from marijuana, and that more research is needed to understand the risks. We also know that pot affects mental functioning in other ways.
If you ever met a person that's a pothead, they don't remember things. I love to give them crap about the fact they can't remember things.
One of my main concerns about smoking is I don't want it to affect my school, because school is very important to me. And if I smoke, I know that my grades are gonna go down.
I've had kids that have come in and said, I'm normally a straight A student. I don't understand what's happened. I can't remember what's happening in the class when I get home. I don't remember to bring my homework back the next day. And when we talk about it, a lot of times what's happened is they started to use marijuana.
I would fall asleep in class. My attention span was real bad, and I was just basically out of it.
Learning and memory is impaired for potentially days after people use. So there's effects of marijuana that last even after the initial high.
Recent research indicates that the effects of marijuana on mental functioning can last even longer than a few days. In fact, they can be permanent. Madeline Meyer, a researcher at Duke University, conducted a study that indicates that long-term users who started as teens lost up to 8 points in IQ.
So IQ is a measure of general mental ability. It measures things like your ability to learn quickly, your ability to understand complex ideas, your ability to reason and figure things out. And IQ predicts getting into college. It predicts what job that you get. It predicts your success on the job.
There was another disturbing finding revealed by Meyer's research.
We found that individuals who started using as teenagers and then quit, they still showed IQ decline, that their IQ wasn't restored to its original level.
In spite of the evidence about the short-term and long-term effects of pot on mental functioning, it's common to hear another argument.
A lot of the smartest people that I know around have smoked marijuana plenty of times.
There's some people they'll smoke marijuana and then they'll pass every test.
We all know students who use marijuana and perform well in school. For Madeline Meyer, the issue isn't whether there are smart people who use pot. It's whether marijuana affects each person's ability to perform to his or her full potential.
If you're higher functioning to begin with, you're still lower functioning than you once were. And I think that we all would prefer to be functioning optimally at the best level that we can. Why would you want to put yourself at risk at all? I would rather keep my 8 IQ points.
I don't think weed is addictive because it's more of a recreational thing.
Cigarettes are much more addictive.
Is marijuana addictive? To address this question, it's necessary to first consider what the word addiction means.
Addiction is when you do something over and over again, you get a bad response, and you get back up the next day and you do it again thinking it's going to be different because you need it, because you want it, because you think it's what's going to help you stay normal.
The guy that I dated couldn't seem to go without it. That's not a clear indication, but I think it probably, like any drug, could be addictive.
There's no longer any scientific debate that marijuana is not just psychologically addictive, but also physically addictive, and especially for adolescents. So the earlier somebody starts, the more chance they have of becoming addicted to pot. I run an adolescent substance treatment program, and we see teenagers who are psychologically and physically addicted to pot, who are dropping out of life, dropping out of their sports, out of school, out of their families, friendships because of marijuana use.
It takes a lot for some people to ever even think of stopping, and it takes on average 6 or 7 times of trying to stop before you actually are successful. So once a person becomes addicted, it's a lifetime of working through that and trying to keep yourself from having the bad effects, even if you don't want to use anymore.
Associated with addiction is physical dependence and the symptoms of withdrawal when someone dependent on marijuana stops using.
As people use more and more of the substance, their body gets used to it, and then it's hard to live without it. They just don't feel themselves when they stop using marijuana.
The only way I could feel normal was to smoke.
When you withdraw from marijuana, and you've been using it long enough and often enough, you will see yourself become irritable. You may have trouble breathing, having trouble coughing early on. You may have a lot of trouble sleeping, can begin to be paranoid, have anxiety.
When I stopped smoking, my anxiety got really bad.
People come into the clinic, they come in because they're worried about their anxiety, they're worried about their feelings of suicide, they're worried about not being able to sleep, and if you take a good history, you find out, oh, well, they stopped using a couple of weeks ago.
I've experienced aggravation.
I was always on edge. I was stressed a lot. I would cry for no reason sometimes. I was depressed. I hated it. I hated not being high. When I didn't smoke, I felt like, what's the purpose of life if I can't get high?
The latest research shows that about 1 in 11 people who use marijuana become addicted to it. And that number goes up to about 1 in 6 for those who start using as teenagers. Recent brain research has shed some light on why teenagers are more vulnerable to addiction.
We used to think that the brain was fully developed by about age 6, but we know now that adolescence is a time of tremendous brain development. The earlier people start, the much more likely they are to become addicted, partly for this very reason.
The teen brain is particularly vulnerable to addiction or dependence. That's also the time when the most important thing they can do is get through school so that they'll be productive adults.
Madeline Meyer's research indicates that the effects of pot on the developing teenage brain pose other risks to success in school and later in life.
We found that people who started using before age 18 showed IQ decline, but those people who started using after age 18 didn't show IQ decline, which suggests that there's something very specific about the adolescent brain and how marijuana is affecting it.
Even in light of such research, there's another argument about marijuana that you often hear.
It's a lot safer than alcohol, which has been legal for a lot longer than marijuana.
Marijuana compared to meth and heroin and cocaine is way safer.
It's nothing like cigarettes.
We hear all the time from adolescents and patients that, well, at least I'm not using meth, or it's not like I'm using alcohol or cocaine or something really dangerous. And what I tell people is that the most dangerous substance is the one you're using. And so alcohol destroys one person's life, marijuana destroys somebody else's life. And how can you compare that and make comparisons between those outcomes? We also know that adolescents have a developing brain, and that adding marijuana to that developing brain can produce some very serious outcomes. Overall, marijuana use in adolescence makes it less likely that people will graduate from high school, graduate from college. It makes it more likely that they'll have psychosis as young adults. It makes it more likely they'll have a decline in their IQ from adolescence to adult years. More likely that they'll get involved in an accident, so why take the chance?
Here are some other things to consider about marijuana. More teenagers use marijuana than heroin, meth, and cocaine combined. 2/3 of adolescents in substance treatment programs are there because of marijuana. Marijuana is the #1 reason why adolescents and young adults go into substance treatment. So there you have it. The evidence that there are risks to marijuana and that being legal is not the same as being safe. Are these risks worth taking? That's something you have to decide for yourself.